So this is your show, man. So
hey, it's our show. Let's do that.
Show.
Yeah, it's our
okay.
show.
Our show.
That's it. So, sitting with David G. Ewing, founder of Motive and Content Lion, longtime friend of mine. Came down here to visit with him and a couple other clients, but wanted to take a few minutes here and just chat with him about his experience coming up in business, as we've both been through a lot, as we were talking about earlier, from history, right? We graduated college in the late 90s. We went through 9/11 early on in business. We saw financial crisis in 2008, some tumultuous years with presidential elections, a pandemic, and we're still here, and the dollar hasn't collapsed, and we're not all sitting in a banana republic somewhere, right? Not yet. Yeah, not yet. So, so we want to just share a fun, lighthearted discussion on business and our experience, and have it relatable to those that are coming up in business today. David.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So let's. Here's the thought, right? So we hit on a couple of things. We're talking about what we experienced early on in our careers, coming out of college. Seeing what we experienced then. So I often sat and thought, because I'm relating this to my kids, right? And your kids we're basically the same demographic, but they're going to have some challenging times ahead of them, right? So what is it that today's younger generation, those who have just graduated college or just graduating high school, when it comes to, I'll call it the panic of what we tend to see in society or in the media, what is it that you wish you knew back then that you know today to keep yourself and things in perspective?
Great question, Brian. Look, we've been through a bunch of crazy stuff, right? And so have most people who've been in our generation. And I think the thing is that the first thing I always remember now, having sat through an entire week of being at my laptop during 9/11 going, the whole world is shut down. Literally, it shut down for a week. And here's the takeaway. It's never as bad as it seems, but conversely, it's never as good as it seems. So 9/11, we sat still for an entire week. Nobody did any work. There was anthrax scares after that. And everybody thought the world was going to go to hell in a handbasket. And lots of bad things did happen.
They did.
But it was never as bad as we thought. And a lot more people are going to be more familiar with the pandemic. We all went through that. We thought that the world was coming to an end. It was bad, but there were always opportunities and moments and moves that you could make. And so, you hear a lot of people now talk about the pandemic years and the amazing things that they did, right? The camping trips they never would have taken, the connectivity with their family that they wouldn't have gotten, and all those other things. So there's always a good side and there's always a bad side. And we are definitely not done. Like, it is going to continue. We are going to have President Trump and his 8 million edicts, and everything is going to be changed. And then somebody else is going to come behind him and they're going to undo it and go back the other way. And then it's going to bounce again. It's going to keep going. We are going into a geopolitical climate where the world is going to be different, where America is not the one superpower. And when we've looked at periods of time in the past, like the 1890s, which is when we were in a similar period, it's often a period of tremendous innovation and change. And so it's not going to be as bad as you think. It's not going to be as great as you think, no matter which side you're on that one. And so look for the opportunity. That's really what you got to do.
Yeah. So I'll further, you're saying it's not as bad as it seems and it's not as good as it seems, right? We've talked about this way long ago, is that we want our peaks to be as high as they can be, but we don't want our valleys to be as low as they can be. And that's in everyday life, right? I mean, but the reality is things are going to happen. Let me just give you a real example that happened to a close friend of mine, not even 48 hours ago. Our families are good friends. 3:00 in the morning, they had a house fire, lost everything. The day before that, one of their sons had just won their baseball tournament. It was a really high. Everybody was exciting. 12 hours later, they lost everything. So when you talk about having your peak as high as you can and your valley trying not to be as low as you can. It's about managing your mental acuity through that time in order to do your best to think straight. But equally as important, please rely on others to help you through that. And it doesn't have to be family. We realize not everybody is close with family, but if it's family, if it's close friends, if it's business colleagues, if it's college roommates, high school friends, a professor, a teacher, whatever it is, rely on others and have them sort of as your ad hoc board of advisors to help you through those challenging times that are there and bounce ideas and thoughts off of them. Because the reality is you're going to experience high highs, you're going to experience low lows, but how you manage those low lows are really going to help you come out better on the other side. And how humble you are at the highest of highs are going to help you become a strong and stronger leader going forward, not only for your own visions, but for the visions of a company you may be running, for the visions of clients that you're helping and servicing. Keep it in perspective when you experience the highest of highs.
That reminds me of an own personal story of mine. So, when I was a junior in college, I sat the bench, and then at the end of the season, they put me in the game. I had a couple great plays, and I got voted captain. So now I was captain going into my senior year. So I'm thinking, oh, this is great. I'm captain my senior year. We're ranked number one in the state. We wound up losing in the first round of the playoffs in a massive upset. Oh no, life is ruined, right? And then Harvard calls, and Harvard says, "Hey, how'd you like to play football at Harvard?" And like things are great again. So then I go to Harvard, and 2 weeks into Harvard, I snap my Achilles tendon, and so that's over. And so then, but you know what happened is that opened up all sorts of new possibilities. I started taking classes at MIT, and that was great. And so then I graduate and the roaring 90s are happening. And it's like, oh, we're all going to be rich forever and ever because the dot coms are here. Then they crash. Then not, I mean, it just keeps going on, right? So the thing is you've got to look for the opportunity and know that like when you get the setbacks, you're going to be okay. You're going to find a way through them. And if you bet on your own abilities and look for the opportunity, you'll be ready. As long as also you've thought about how to prepare for bad times, because they're going to come too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad times are going to come from health. They're going to come financially. They're going to come in relationships, whatever it might be. You can't, what is it? You can't predict the unknown, right? You got to roll with it and you got to learn to understand how to live with it when they do arrive. And then you survive, right? Sometimes it's just survival mode that you're executing in, and that survival mode personally or survival mode in business. You've got to find a way to get through it as best you can. And that can be from books, can be from talking to others. But the one thing that I've learned and this is from experience, is not bottling it up inside and thinking I can just push it down and I'll be okay in a few days. It doesn't work that way, right? You've got to talk through it with others and seek help where needed, whether it's professional help or whether it's just chatting with a friend on a phone call or whatever means necessary. Talk through it, help yourself get through it, and have others help you get through challenging times, for sure.
Speaking of books, we recorded this in front of my favorite bookshelf because I've taken the things that I absolutely love the most and put them on the shelf. And actually, if I were starting over again, here's the one book off the shelf that I would say, this is the one. So this is Nassim Taleb. The guy wrote 3 books in a series. This is the third one. He also wrote a book called Black Swan. And it really is talking about how there are all kinds of events that occur in life, and they come out of nowhere. And when they do, you could be tremendously harmed by them, or you could benefit from them. And my favorite story in the book is, the author, Nassim Taleb, used to be a stock trader, and he's at a seminar, and they have this consultant that's going to help them like improve their trading. And the guy says, "How many of you think the market is going to go up?" And most people in the room raise their hand. And he says, "How many of you think the market is," and including Nassim, "how many think it's going to go down this week?" And nobody raises their hand. Later, he says, "How many of you are invested, long to like take advantage of the stock market going up?" Most people raise their hand, and they ask Nassim Taleb, "Well, how about you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm set up short." And it's like, well, why, if you think the market's going up, why would you bet on it going down? And the answer he gave was kind of the inside of the book, which is it goes up most weeks and it goes up a little bit. But when it goes down a lot. And I want to be there for the week when it goes down. I'm set up so that I will make money on the stock market going down. And so he did that. And every week, for weeks and weeks and weeks, he lost money, but just a little bit. And then one day, the crash, and I think for him it was the crash of 87. That crash of 87 happens, it goes into the ground. Everybody's jumping out of windows, and he's set for life. He's just done, you know? And so I think that, one of the other great philosophies is expect adversity and expect chaos and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you're in a position to be benefited from that. And there's all kinds of real life examples of how you can do that. And this book, Anti-Fragile, is my favorite because it's all about techniques that you can use in your personal life, in your business, in your career, so that when chaos happens, it's not that you're strong enough to withstand it, but you actually benefit from it. And I think that's like one of my favorite lessons, to make sure that you're just taking advantage of the opportunities that are always present, no matter what's changing.
Yeah, great point. Everybody's talking about the stock market. It's what, stairs up, elevator down. It's like, it's usually how you see it, right? It's we're
Uh-huh.
up, we're up, we're up, we're up in a slow period of time,
Crash.
and then the elevator comes right back down to the
Yeah.
first or second floor, and it's starting over again. So that's it. So let's. I want to ask you a question about business, right? Because you and I have both been through some challenging times over the course of business. So you started your company in San Francisco, San Francisco Consulting Group, rebranded it as Motive. That's there. But back in the early days, it was you, it was growing, and then you hit a wall when we had financial struggles. What and how did you get through that time in order to survive and now eventually thrive?
Yeah. So I started the company in 2001, had my first employee the week before 9/11, got through that. Um, but I think what you're talking about is 2008.
I
So
am.
by
Yep.
2008, the business has been booming. We've gone up, we're like 15 or 20 people. And I think I'm in my 20s, maybe in my 30s. Yeah, I was in my 30s. I was 32 at that point. Um, yeah, I just thought everything was going great. But I remember in February of 2008, I'm sitting there looking at my forecast and I can see revenue all the way out to November. And I'm like, well, that's pretty good for us. That's great. But then March rolls around and November is still a zero. And then April rolls around and we're still forecasting a zero. And it kept going and kept going. And then we get to October and I've still got a zero for November. And the market falls apart and there's no chance of finding any business. All of our clients canceled their contracts. And it's the only time in my life where I've had to do layoffs. It was gut wrenching having to lay people off for no fault of their own because I just can't afford to pay them because the account is at zero was one of the most difficult things. There are all these like agonizing micro decisions that come into that too. Like, who do you lay off? Because you're not laying off everyone, so you have to pick. And why do you pick the people that you do? And how do you do this in the most decent way possible? Those are horrible, horrible decisions to have to make. But what happened out of that is actually I asked for help. And the help that I did was I called one of my biggest partners, a huge company, Oracle, and I had to do the humiliating thing of saying, guys, I'm about to go out of business. I have zero revenue. I have, no prospects and the market is in the tank. Is there any way you can help me? And one of the cool things that I learned is actually came from Machiavelli. Machiavelli, just quick side note, said, hey, when you're dealing with different parties that are combating, and that could be two businesses that are competing for the same market or something else, he said, don't just sit on the sidelines and just say, hey, I'm staying out of it, whichever one of you guys, I'm still your friends. He said, no, pick one and go all in on that one, because if that one's successful, that they'll be like, hey, you were on my side. If they fail, the Machiavelli side of this is the other guy says, you're a pretty loyal friend to people. Like, it would be great if you became my friend and you're going to still be okay. So when it came to my business, I had this tiny little company and there's Oracle and there's Salesforce and there's SAP and they're all scratching for the same dollar. I picked and I said, well, I'm picking one. I'm going to pick Oracle. And so because of that, when I was in trouble, I was able to call them and they knew that I was a strategic, small, but growing partner. And they backed me up. And so I got out of that because I asked for help. And lo and behold, 5 people looked at their Rolodex and said, yeah, I'm going to give you some names to call. I called them. I got some small contracts. It was enough to make payroll. And I got through November, December. And then by January, I was back on my feet. And then we were able to rebuild and get the business going. So It was a hell of a hard time, probably one of the worst times in business for me personally, but it turned out to be amazing.
Yeah. Do you find, because one of the things I do at challenging times is I journal, right? I put stuff down on paper when I'm getting through, like if whatever it might be, and it helps me reflect back on it, so I'm not just pulling it out of my head, relating back to what happened. Do you find any little tips or tools like that that have assisted you?
I do. I have one tip, and I found that actually what stresses me out about a situation is not the fact that I'm dealing with adversity. It's the fact that I have some, it's kind of my fault, right? Like any adversity, it's like, well, if I'd only known this, I could have made these different decisions before. And there's this baggage that comes with
Yeah.
all the adversity of like whatever the situation is, because you have this regret that you didn't make a different choice. So one of the things I like to do is I like to imagine that I just started occupying David Ewing's body today, and I just got transported in. And like, what's happened? What's the past? Is the past. Like, I just showed up today with all of his memories, and now I have to solve the problems. And once I do that, for some reason, just letting go of the baggage of how I got here and just focusing on, all right, well, how do I get out of here? How do I fix this situation? It frees me up from the emotional negativity that goes along with the negative situation. And I just feel like I'm back in control. I've got a fresh start. And it's like January 1st for the year all over again. I'm clearing the slate. I'm starting over again. It's
Sure.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. I also, one of the things that I do is I try to see things through the eyes of my kids, right? Like I look at the kids. So I'm trying to teach them life lessons, and they're old enough to have some of their own lessons now and make their own mistakes, which they should be having, and understanding how to recover from those. But I try to put myself through their eyes, and what would they want to know and need to know about how to recover from this current crisis, and how and what can they rely on and who can they rely on to get through it. So I find that for me, that helps because I put myself in their position and sort of translate that to me at present and say, here's what if I were them and I was in their situation or they were in my situation, how would they recover from this and how would they get beyond it? It helps me bring it sort of from a third person standpoint on it as well.
I've got one more trick, and that is, when I got started in my career, the roaring 90s were happening, and everybody wanted to be part of a startup. And it was like, well, the startups have high highs, there's low lows, there's big roller coasters. And I was like, yeah, get me on board that roller coaster. I want to go through all that. And everybody thinks of roller coasters as being super fun when you're in free fall. And when you're in business, it's not,
Yeah.
And
Right.
but you sign up for that. If you decide to become an entrepreneur, you're signing up for chaos and high highs and low lows, right? And some people gravitate towards that. And what I realized is, why not apply that to just my whole life? Because my life is filled with high highs and low lows. And if you are excited by the idea of a roller coaster, then fine. Like, just accept that and accept it in all parts of your life. And then actually that works out. And so you
Sure.
can just, while you're going through the unbelievably difficult times and the great times, you're just on the roller coaster. And so ride it.
Yeah, good point. I think the last point on this topic, as thinking through it, um, keep an open mind because you can have several different thoughts and coming to several different decisions. Is one actual decision correct? No, it's not. You can reach a goal through different pathways, through different paths, right? And there's not necessarily one exact way to do it. You're gonna experience the positives and the negatives, what's right, what's wrong. But I always recommend avoid listening to a person tell you that there's only one correct way to do something because that's completely false information, right? There's more than one correct way to achieve a goal that you have set or to achieve a common goal for a company or whatever it is. Um, and I'm sure you've experienced that through not only trial and error in your world, because I've experienced it in mine, but keep an open mind, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and find common ground when discussing just about anything. And you'll realize who also has that same thought, who has that perception, and who usually your true friends are at that time. And you'll realize who the ones aren't that are only in it for themselves.
I actually have a slight counterpoint to that.
Please.
So actually, let me grab his book. It's right here. Yeah, Jack Daly. So this is somebody I know personally. Jack wrote this book, Life by Design. He's an incredibly successful business guy, and he has one of those great stories. Started from the bottom. He was a caddy at the local golf course, and was like, how do I get like to be like these guys, you know? And and one of his mantras is, there's only one best way to sell something. But I think to combine the two thoughts, when you're working in business and you're trying to find a process, you're like, there's only one best process here, but you have to have an open mind. Like, do we have it right now? And the answer is usually no, we
Right.
haven't done it right now. It's not actually the correct way. So we need to be on the search for like the correct way to sell something, the correct way to handle a business problem, the correct way to plan your strategy for your company. But don't assume you're on it right now. And that's a tough one to do.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, good counterpoint. That's that. Let's bring it to present day. All right, we're looking at 2025. I think you alluded to earlier. President Trump's edicts, and it's caused fluctuations in the stock market. It's caused fluctuations with relationships with foreign countries, et cetera. From there, and the point, we're not getting political. That's on this, but what when we look at present day and managing the nuances of business today, and what it takes, you're very strategic and very big on building sound and qualified content to find new opportunities, but also the main focus, as we talked about earlier, is to build trust, even with those that you have not yet met. How do you do that?
Well, I don't know how you pick someone in insurance, because I've known you since we were like 15 years old, and I was like, I'm trusting that guy because I've known him for so long. But don't have any help there. But I mean, here's the thing. Yes, trust is more important now than ever before. And you can look at politics, you can look at the world of content with like podcasters, you can look at influencers. And the thing is what gets people to follow, subscribe, be a part of, is whether you like it or not, those people trust that source, right? And we're in a time where, we can't trust big media. We can't trust little media. We can't trust podcasters. Everything's a deep fake. So the more you can get to something authentic, something real, I think people gravitate towards it. Whether you like Trump or not, if you look at the people who do like Trump, why do they like him? Well, it usually comes down to, they don't like a lot of the things that they have, but they feel like he's authentically himself. I think that's really at the core of it, is that they feel like, for better or worse, that's the real Trump, and not some caricature of him, or he has become this caricature of who he is, but that's now who he really is. And I think when you look at the Republicans that were there before, or you look at the Democratic Party, the reason that they were not successful is because they just ring false, right? Nobody trusts what they're saying, because sometimes it's too much of like a beauty pageant answer to any question, and they're not going to give you the straight answers. And so people are looking for someone who can give them straight answers, and they gravitate towards that, and they really appreciate it. And so you can choose to refute whether those answers are real or not, but those people believe it. And so I think when creating real content, you have to be a little bit courageous. You can't just give beauty pageant bullshit answers to every question and think that people are going to be stupid and just be like, oh, that's, you just told me what I wanted to hear. They're going to know. Yeah. Everybody can tell honest voice from fake voice inherently. We all can. And that's really at the core of, I think, what is great content, is if it's gritty, if it's even a little bit ugly, but it's authentic, I'm going to pay attention.
And maybe even a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah.
Showing your vulnerabilities in it too, because of the experience that you've had as a business professional, and helping others understand what you've gone through in that content to get to the point where you're creating this content.
Yep.
Yeah. I found that I found it as well. Right. I mean, it's a lot of the content that we create, and we're in different industries. So from, being in the risk management and commercial insurance side of the world, look, I mean, I get it. We're down there most of the time with used car salesmen at times, and think of other low end professions that are there. But the reality is, the industry, the commercial insurance industry, is one of which is very confusing, and nobody rushes out of college to go into that as a professional. You find your way into it.
Didn't you?
I did not. Yeah, right. I did not. I found my way into it, and actually, I found my way into it from a really awesome cherished conversation that I take with me is I had a conversation in February of 2002 with my godfather. He was a commercial insurance professional. We had breakfast in February, and um, shortly thereafter, a couple of weeks after, he was in Florida. He took my cousins to Florida, and he suffered a brain illness, and he never recovered. So, but he survived for several years, but his short term memory was completely wiped out. Like, he didn't remember the conversation that we had that morning at
It's
breakfast.
like your pivotal conversation. He
But
doesn't remember it.
but
That's sad.
yeah,
That's
but
sad.
what he taught me in it, about it, is what launched me into the career that I chose to exit the engineering world and enter the world of risk management and insurance from there. And it's a conversation that I remember extremely well. I wrote about it at that time, when it occurred, and it's what launched me into this career. And a lot of that conversation focused on building trust. And back then, we didn't have LinkedIn, we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have the social media that I don't even think Facebook was launched yet in 2002. So we didn't have that. It was a handshake. It was meeting for dinner, or it was meeting for lunch, or just going and delivering an honest conversation face to face with someone that was there. We didn't have the ways of meeting others other than through your centers of influence, which we all still have today, as that's a really root of what we do, of having our individuals who trust us enough to refer us to other people. And those relationships have been built for a long, long period of time.
See, Brian, this is funny because this is not how I remember it. Like, when I met you when I was 15, it was like career day. And one person's like, I want to be an astronaut. And somebody else is like, I'm going to play Major League Baseball. And Brian stands up and is like, I'm going to be in commercial insurance. We thought you were a little weird.
Yeah,
but it's okay. You turned out to be
I still
okay.
am a little weird. That's just how it goes. Nothing's changed with that, right? There's some friends from high school who have us believe in that. And we were telling some funny stories earlier, but we're not going to share those here. That's on it. So yeah, the reality is, when with content creation that's of it today, it's helping build awareness of your self brand and building trust, including for people that don't know you yet, but will know you, so that when the point in time comes, that if it's a prospect that you're working on, and you pick up the phone and call them, you get to a point and say, hey man, I love your content, and I want to further a discussion on this specific topic that we've touched on, or that you've touched on back in January of this year, or that you touched on recently. Um, it helps for me when there's people that I follow and I get a chance to meet them. I feel as if I already know them before knowing them and shaking their hand. And that's sort of the content that I look to build. Is I'm hopeful that the content that is created, that I'm able to create, allows for one to get to know me before I actually get to have an opportunity to shake their hand.
That seems to work.
So that's strategy that's there. So all right, so from a content of building trust standpoint, which we touched on, in your business space, do you find it matters on which media outlets and what type of media that you're launching?
Yes, and it's changing quickly. So I think, we're at the inflection point where I think social media presented content is getting really, really difficult to break through, right? Because there's just so much AI generated content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And any two clowns with a bookshelf and a camera can make
pretty
content
much,
like this,
content like
and,
this, right?
And so, the thing that I have found is, what builds trust better than anything is useful free advice, right? So if you can be useful to someone and it is condensed a period of time as possible, then you're going to build trust, right? And that means inherently that you are giving away ideas. And a lot of people are terrified of that. They're like, but this is my best idea. And I'll give you an example. So shameless plug for my podcast, Content Kingdom. I just had a guest on who will announce in another 2 weeks. And he has made an empire out of content. It's actually stock trading content. And what he found, and is a story that he provides, is, he used to have these like really technical explanations for what he did, and you could only get that content by paying for it. And then what he found was if he just gave that away for free, sure, like 1 out of 10 people who watch that content would like figure it out. They would build the solution and they would go trade. And he was actually like, that's kind of my mission,
Yeah.
even though I didn't make any money off of it. However, 9 out of 10 people still came to him because they're like, what else do you have? And you can't be afraid that you don't have anything else because you're getting new ideas every day. I'm getting new ideas every day. So the toughest thing is there is a line where you have to, obviously, if you're going to monetize your content, you have to have that paywall somewhere. But it's a lot further down than you think, where you're going to hit your optimum point and generate revenue. And you do have to give as much free content away. I actually was just meeting yesterday with our team, and we were working on this new like machine learning model built inside this cool Oracle product. And I said, you know what we should do? We should make a recording of how to make the perfect machine model on your own and give it away for free. And immediately the marketing department was like, oh God, no, like don't do that, and then they'll have it free. I'm like, yeah. And 1 out of 10 people will go off and build something. And you know what? That's kind of our mission as a company, is to do that, is to teach people these kinds of things. 9 out of 10 people will be like, I see what's involved now. I'm like, no, thanks. Like, you guys, I'm going to call you. And then you're going to get the call and not someone else. So you have to be willing to give value. You can't be fluff. You can't just be BSing your way through things, and you can't hold back, because if you do, you're just going to create resentment. How many times have we all been on that page that says, download the 20 things to solve your problem? Just put in your email, and you're like, I'm not going to put my email in for that. Like, screw that. Like, I'm not giving you my email because, yeah. And so you don't get the thing. They don't get the thing. Nobody gets the thing. That's like some kind of like old school early aughts thinking, is like, I'll just make a white paper and have you sign up for it, and you're going to sign up. Like, nobody does that anymore.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point. In my industry, look, there's the insurance realm, whether you're on the commercial insurance side or the benefit side, it's super confusing, right? The technology, or the terminology that exists out there. It's something that even the most seasoned business professional may not know, right? They're going to call up and they're going to ask, we'll have a discussion. It's like, I need to review business insurance. Well, there's no true business insurance policy. There's several types of liability policies that a business should have, but there's not one that's just a business insurance, right? So there's a lot of confusion inside of the industry, and it needs to be simplified. So my challenge that I see is finding a way of taking a very boring industry, which is what I'm in, even though I don't find the risk management side of it very boring, taking a very boring industry and putting out content that solves the problem of, I don't understand the industry at all. And really, what does my company need in order to have me not shut it down, in order to pay off a lawsuit that it may be having? And there's so many types and avenues and directions in which to achieve that. But it's taking little snippets that are 30 seconds or a minute at a time, or a 2-minute read on a newsletter, or a YouTube short, whatever it is that I can develop and put out there, that if someone watches it and comes back later on with a question, then I'm humbled in the fact that I've potentially solved a problem for someone that's there.
Yeah.
That's on it.
I had to kind of, over the arc of our 20 years of doing business together, I've had a couple of epiphanies on this. So I used to equate, and this was a big mistake for me, so I'll just admit it. I used to equate with boring with unimportant. And so I was like, oh, this is that insurance stuff. It's really boring. I trust Brian. Like, Brian, just make sure that we have the right insurance. And I went on with my life. That was obviously a huge mistake, because boring does not mean unimportant. Instead, it really took this story from this other guy who was like, look, if you are going to be in a snow blizzard, are you the kind of guy who's going to be like, oh my God, I don't have my winter coat, I don't have my boots, I'm out here freezing in the cold? Or are you going to be the guy who has 5 layers on and is sipping, cocoa by the fire on your fire pit outside, right?
Right.
Because whether it's the pandemic or another business challenge or a personal life challenge, like, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the guy who's like, oh, I'm prepared for this, like, I'm just gonna have cocoa by the fire because the blizzards come and I'm ready? Or do you want to be the guy with no jacket and his t-shirt running around like a fool, right? And that's that's a character decision. That is like a personality decision. And the payment for that is you have to make sure that you spend the time to analyze what could go wrong. In fact, I belong to the Entrepreneurs Organization, and in there, I meet all kinds of entrepreneurs, and they present on like confidential stuff that they wouldn't share with the public. and I won't, of course, either. But one of the things that somebody did that was so simple that I thought was really clever is they wrote down all the possible things that could possibly go wrong in their business, right? And they made like it was a pretty long list. And then they put two more columns. The first column was, how likely is this to happen? Is this like once in a million, or is this like this could happen like this year, or this could happen this week?
Right.
It happens all the time. So what was the likelihood, and then what was the severity, right? Like, and so obviously something that could happen next week, where the severity is like the end of the business, you have to have a risk management strategy for that. You just can't. You can't just be like, I hope it doesn't happen. That's the equivalent of being the guy in the blizzard in a t-shirt, right?
Sure.
And amazingly, that is a really interesting and academic exercise that I found fascinating, and I've done that ever since. And I always go through that now, and I'm like, what are all the things that can go wrong? What's the frequency or likelihood, and what's the severity? And now let's make a plan. And actually, I sleep so much better.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that's probably a great point to conclude here on it, right? About you can't just go through life without a plan. You can't go through business without a plan. You've got to have something that you're able to follow, that you're able to execute, that can change for you, right? Because there's world events are going to happen, geopolitical events are going to happen, whatever pandemics are going to happen, whatever it might be, and those plans may change. But if you have it down and you're able to follow it and believe in the core of what you're doing, you'll ultimately get to where it is that you want to be 5, 10, 20 plus years from now.
yeah. I'll end on one last note, which is, uh, in that same vein, do you want to look back on your life and say, I spent more time planning my vacations than I did planning my life? Because that unfortunately happens to a lot more people. And I've even looked at different periods of my life and been like, did I really think about my plan through maybe a couple phases?
Sure.
And time goes by day after day, and it slips by quickly. And so I think it's important for all of us to ask ourselves, which person do I want to be? Do I want to be the person who spends more time planning my vacation than planning my life?
Absolutely. Yep. So let's tell everybody where we can find you.
Yeah. So lots of places to find me. You can find my personal site and blog at davidgewing.com. My podcast is called Content Kingdom, and it's for people who are interested in producing content that builds trust. If you are interested in getting a content management system, you can go to contentlion.com, which is our software company.
Yeah. You can find me primarily on LinkedIn under my name, Brian Clement. Also on YouTube under my YouTube channel called Be Uncommon, BEUNCOMMON, and various places from there too.
All right.
So, hey, peace out.